Good evening all, and welcome. Before the video begins, I would just like to give a huge thank you to my amazing patrons. Patrons are the kind people who pledge a small amount each month on Patreon. These kind people kindly help sustain the channel. And if that is something that you would like to do, feel free to check out my Patreon. Of course, there is no obligation. And your small change like $1 every month can really go a long way. I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested in checking it out. Thanks guys. But now, on to the video. Now, today's stories in particular are very dark indeed. And in my opinion, these are probably the best police stories I have ever done. Seriously. You will not be disappointed. It's safe to say that these stories are not for the faint of heart. So please proceed with the utmost caution. You have been warned. But now that everyone is sitting comfortably, it's time to let the darkness take control. I was dispatched on a gunshot. The 65-year-old mother reported her son had just shot himself. She was refusing to provide CPR or go to verify if he was okay. I was only a few blocks away. My best friend and I arrived simultaneously and contacted the complainant at the back door. She was in a thin nightgown and completely calm. All she said was, "He's down there," pointing downstairs. As we made our way down, I noticed a haze in the air, thick enough that it was forming waves in the air. I didn't take immediate conscious notice of it, but both my partner and I commented on a strong smell. Although I knew what it was, I immediately commented that it must be gunpowder, somehow making the connection with the cold description of a gunshot. As we get to the bottom of the stairs, I stopped at the sound of horrible moaning coming from a back bedroom. I made eye contact with Adam. "You ready?" He nodded, and we moved in slowly. The bedroom was tucked off a small hallway, which intersected with the main downstairs hallway. I saw blood before entering. 3 walls of the room were covered in goo. I still couldn't see the victim, but I could hear him. I saw a rifle laying on the bed, laying in a literal puddle of blood. I forced myself to take a few more steps through the door. Training takes over. And for some reason I was remembering the adage, "Don't stop in the fatal funnel." As I came through the door, I saw him to my left. He was down on all fours, rocking back and forth. The first detail I noticed was his very red shirt. My mind thought it was weird that he was wearing such a red shirt. I noticed the bottom hem of the shirt was white. It was just a normal white t-shirt. "Buddy, we've got some help coming. Just stay here." I'm not sure what you're supposed to say, and he raised his face at me. It was completely cut in half, the skin flaps waving back and forth. He had stuck a rifle under his chin, and when he stretched to reach the trigger, his head tipped back, and the pellet entered the soft jaw, crossing the hard pellet, and left right at the top of his nose. There was nothing left but cheeks. I'll never forget the moaning. I knew it was not funny, but my mind triggered on some sort of zombie and predator fanfic. On all fours, he kept rocking back and forth, shaking his head back and forth and just moaning. The sound is still with me. As he shook his head, the two flaps of cheeks kept swinging back and forth, opening and closing, just like the predator. I swear if that guy had stood up and walked towards me, I would have shot him. The first few medics arrived. They'd been told by dispatch that the subject was Echo, obviously deceased, and hesitated until I pointed out that they needed to get on with this one, and get it on now. They started to cut off his red shirt, and I told dispatch to get the bird going now. She said, "You want them on standby?" She was trying to help me, as really only medics are supposed to tell the air medics to fly. No, tell them to fly now. This one's going. My sergeant was the third to arrive. When he got downstairs, he yelled at me. "What's the smell?" "Gunpowder, Sarge." "Nah, that's not gunpowder." He breathed a few deep nasal breaths. "That's like propane or something." The medic stopped and inhaled. Shit. We all go silent for the first time, and we all hear at the same time what had been covered up by the horrible moaning. In the wall behind where the man shot himself, there was a bullet hole. Out of the hole was coming a hissing sound. The bullet had cut through the natural gas main that fed the house from the outside meter. For the first time in my career, I saw firefighters panic. "Get out of there now!" 3 of them were yelling at me at the same time. I got on the radio and called, "No flames, and tell everyone to get clear." I saw for the first time what were the waves of haze that I had noticed earlier. It was natural gas, which had filled up the bottom floor of the house. Filled it up so much that the top of the gas lake was over my eyes, about 6 feet deep. The medics grabbed the guy and ran upstairs, and I quickly cleared the downstairs, thinking the guy might have small kids in the room or something. They were clear. I came upstairs and found Adam sitting calmly in the sitting room with the victim's mother. I stopped, unable to understand what he was still doing in the house. "Adam, get them out of here!" I wasn't yelling, but it made me mad. I had stayed behind for 2 minutes in this situation that was probably going to kill me, and he had stayed in the house to talk to the mum? He looked at me confused. "Adam, get out of the house!" I was now yelling. The mother stood up, saying she needed shoes. I grabbed her, probably too hard on the arm, as she was old, and I pushed her through the door. "Get out now, and do it now!" I could feel myself losing a bit of control, and I had never, ever lost control. Adam didn't understand. He had turned his radio down so that he could sit with the mum, and not have her hear the terrible details that would likely be on the radio. He didn't hear me give the evacuate order, and he still didn't understand, but he trusted me implicitly. He stepped between me and the mum, who was still trying to get inside. He did what had to be done, but he did it gently at least. I couldn't manage that. I went back in with some hazmat guys 10 minutes later. The horror of the room was more noticeable this time. I saw that little bone and teeth chips were stuck in the sole of my boot. I saw that huge glops of human goo were dripping down the walls. I got to the clean wall, the only wall without goo over it, and it was the wall he had faced when he pulled the trigger. I looked down and saw his chin, laying on the carpet at my feet. "Dispatch, check with the hospital, see if they want this tissue." I couldn't believe I was even asking. This dude was going to die. I knew it, everyone knew it, right? That affirmed. They want it delivered. Copy. How the hell? My sergeant, one of my best friends, offered to do it. Nah, Sarge. I'll do it. I knew I was already going to feel this one. No need for anyone else to have this memory. I grabbed a biosack from one of the firefighters and went upstairs to the freezer. I put a layer of ice inside and went back for the chin. You know how sometimes it's the false expectations that get you? I went to pick the chin up, and for some reason I knew it would be hard, like chins are. When I grabbed it though, it felt like unset jello. Of course it did. There was no bone there. It was literally just the chin. It had fallen gooey side down and stuck to the carpet fibers, as it dried over the previous 30 minutes or so. I had to tug at it pretty good, and it finally pulled off, landing in my palm, gooey side up. I could see where his whiskers poked out from the inside. Whoever thought there was another end to each of our chin whiskers? I gave the bag to a firefighter to run it to the hospital. It didn't matter. I knew he was dead, or going to be soon enough. I learned later that he was 45 years old. At age 35, he got a degenerative brain disease, Huntington's or something. It took him pretty quickly, leaving him with reasonable skills of an 8-year-old. His mother begged us on the front grass, after I probably bruised her arm, just to let him die. Where's the DNR, I asked. There wasn't one. He died 2 hours after shooting himself. They pumped blood bag after blood bag into him, but it all came out of his massive facial wounds. The ME called me and asked, "So, that was a weird one, huh?" Stupid MEs. "What do you need, man?" I ask him. "You notice anything strange in there?" "Nope. Just another suicide." "Yeah, figured." "Alright, see you next time," he said. Yep. I'm not a police officer, but a local police officer in my town has a pretty messed up story. She doesn't do much police work now, so much as public speaking for the police. She was called to a house where a woman had been babysitting while the parents were out to dinner. I'm not sure who made the call, but I'm pretty sure it was the babysitter. Anyway, when they showed up, the babysitter was on the front lawn completely covered in blood and hysterical, but not like upset hysterical, just nuts. The officer and her partner got out and tried to talk to her, and she wasn't making any sense, just kind of saying, "No, she'll be fine, they can sew it back on." That was a little more unnerving by the fact that she had bloody scissors in her gown, but they didn't know this until later. The officer's partner stayed with the hysterical woman and tried to get her to make sense, while the officer, who now does public speaking, went in to check the house. She found the daughter, who was being babysat, completely decapitated by a pair of scissors. She went out to get her partner and say what she had found, and when the woman who did it realized what was probably going to happen, she freaked out and pulled the scissors on the officer that found the daughter. She ended up stabbing her in the hand. Not as bad as it could have been, right? Turns out, the lady with the scissors had HIV, and the blood was both hers and the daughter's. The officer had to go on HIV medication to prevent infection, and ended up becoming very sick for about a year. Afterwards, she was in the clear from the infection and returned to work. The worst call I went to was a simple 9-year-old possibly having an asthma attack. I was right on top of the area when the call came out, because I had responded as backup on a previous bullshit call. So, I take the call because it would be easy, and I didn't have any calls holding in my beat. All I would have to do is wait for FD and the ambulance and let them do their medical thing, while I get basic info from the caretaker. I get the call and it's in Section 8 housing. I am unfamiliar with the area because it is no way near my beat or zone. The mother and aunt are screaming. I run upstairs alone and see this 9-year-old is seizing. I don't know what to do other than try and hold him securely so that he didn't get hurt. The seizure lasted a minute at most, and it was over, but he wasn't breathing. I started CPR for about 2 minutes, and when backup arrived, I'm screaming on the radio to step it up. This particular Section 8 housing, I later learned, is in a very high violent crime area. When I backed out and let FD take over, there were about 70 people gathered outside the apartment. We had no crowd control, and for whatever reason people were just starting fights. I did my best to manage emotions, because no one likes it when a child is involved. I followed the child to the hospital, but just as I made contact with the FD, the ambulance driver lets me know that the child is gone. Our city does not pronounce children dead at the scene, ever. We take them to the hospital, working the entire time no matter what. But now I realize it's my call, and I have to inform the family once we get to the hospital. The family consisted of an entourage of over 20 people, some of which were causing the fights. I am an emotional guy, so I'm already crying in my patrol car like a little girl, just at the thought of how I'm going to tell them, and the fact that this child just died and I couldn't save him. They are all following the ambulance, thinking the medical team is going to save him, but don't realize he's already gone. We get to the hospital, and I've composed myself, and the doctor comes out and informs me, so I need to get my mother. I tried to get her alone, but it's a no-go. The entire family insists on being there, and I'm struggling to find the words to start when I get a little teary-eyed, and the mother reads my face and just collapses. I still have to contact homicide and inform them of the situation due to the circumstances. The family starts fighting with each other over whose fault it was, the reason that he got the asthma attack. It got ugly. Luckily, the hospital police department was there to defuse, and no arrests had to be made. They'd never heard of a person dying from asthma if they had breathing treatment, which was the case here. The family did everything right, but he still passed. It has stuck with me, and this is the first time that I've managed to tell this story in full. I was trying to be helpful to the zone I was in, because they were slammed with calls. I figured I would knock this call out so that they could handle the more serious ones, and I wish I had never taken it. As a cop, we tend to see the worst in people. As a cop in a large metropolitan area, LA, we tend to see a lot more than the average officer. I'll share some of the stories that haunt us, as well as share some of my own, and those of fellow officers, in an attempt to maintain my anonymity. I should probably warn you though, that this is very dark. The call. Unit to handle. Meet the fire department at this address for an attempted suicide. Subject is a female. FD waiting for PD to respond. Code 2. Unit 2 respond identify. We get there and ensure the location is safe for FD to enter and give them the green light to help the female out. The attempt wasn't the gruesome part, not even close to some of the worst scenes I've been to, but the story. Asking why she did it, and the look on her face when she was reliving her nightmare, is an event I don't care to think about or dwell on. As a teenager growing up, she had an older brother who decided the gang life was for him, and no matter what he did, their parents always had his back. Aside from the violence and the terrorizing of the community, he decided that one day he wanted his sister. Her attempts to stop him were futile, and in a state of shock, she told her mother what happened. As if it wasn't bad enough, her mother told her to shut up and not say anything, and told her that she must be making things up. This wasn't enough for her to ponder suicide. Instead, she went to the police. Her mother disowned her and kicked her out for sending her brother to prison. This wasn't enough for her to ponder suicide. Years later, she had managed to make something of herself, and somehow got over the horror show that had been her life so far. She meets an incredible young man who thinks the world of her, and she sees a light at the end of the dark tunnel. That is until they find out he has terminal cancer. At this point, she wonders what she's done to anger God so much that she's punished this badly, and she says that she gives up. I don't have anything on my belt that will make a difference. Handle the call, log it, and clear for the next day. The night's not over though. Next call. It's not a call, but what we like to call an OBS. OBS is short for observation, meaning instead of a radio call generated by someone dialing 911, this is an activity generated by the officer's observations, driving around and looking for work, and I'm running plates on random cars, when one of them returns with a hit. Stolen vehicle. Boom, baby. Control shows me a code 37 vehicle, northbound ABC Street, and the vehicle license. Let me get backup and an airship. We start following, and the adrenaline is kicked into high gear, and we wonder if we'll keep driving normally until backup arrives, or if we'll spook and turn this into a pursuit. And there he goes, blowing the red light. Pursuit. Throw the lights and sirens on, and we're off. Backup catches up with us, and we're following this guy all over the place. When it happens, he blows through an intersection and hits a car, and there is debris everywhere. A bunch of units go straight to the suspect's vehicle, and as I was about to head over to see the other car, there's a family inside and a hole through the passenger side of the front windshield. I start heading towards the front of the car. She's been launched several cars' lengths away, and she's up against the curb. Running to see her, I see that she's in a bad shape, and I kneel down next to her, and I can hear her gasp. And that's it. She takes her last breath, and suddenly, the excitement of the chase isn't so exciting. The next call. Any unit to handle the unknown troubles at the following address. Code 3 incident. Unit to handle identify. Unknown troubles can quickly turn into clusters. Someone had called 911, but they aren't able to tell the dispatcher enough information on the call, or it's interrupted, or the line went dead. So we're going in blind, not knowing what's going on, or who is involved. We get there, and it's a rather large house. Simultaneously, we see the fire department pulling up as well. I yell over to them mentioning, "You guys got a call too, huh? You guys got any info?" "We don't have shit," fire tells us. They were told it was medical or a panic alarm. As we go up the driveway, a lady comes out the door and runs to us in tears. She's pointing frantically behind her and gasps, "Back there, back there, he's back there." I try to ask her what was going on and who was back there in her house, but she's hysterical and runs past us. We start jogging to the back of the residence, with our guns drawn, not sure what we were expecting. Fire is right behind us, and as we go to the back, we see that there is a pool, and that's when we see him. He's in the pool. Fire takes a look and I say, "You guys gonna get him?" The response, "Nah, he's dead." Taking a look at him, it looked like he'd been there a while, and taking him out wouldn't have changed a thing. Not to mention, he'd tied himself to weights. Turned out he left a suicide note. We take a look, and after reading the note and talking to the man's wife, we learn why he killed himself. This man was a successful professional and had been doing very well for himself and his family. He took great pride in what he did, and he relied on his sharp intellect to be successful. Unfortunately, a clot formed in his brain, and after going to the hospital to be treated, he was never the same. Tasks took longer, and everything became more difficult. He stopped working and stayed home, but having been so independent before, it was killing him to have people helping him, so we decided he'd help his wife out one last time. On her birthday, he freed her from having to take care of him. In his mind, it was a gift he was giving her. She cried, and I told her it wasn't her fault. She told me he'd woken up that morning and told her happy birthday, but she was so tired she told him, "Just a few minutes, I'm so tired." He told her not to worry and go back to bed, and that was the last time they spoke. I'm gonna go have a beer and pretend that none of this ever happened. I'm a specialist constable with the UK police, which means I'm a volunteer but have the same powers and responsibilities. I started out in a small rural town, which is extremely stereotypical of a Middle English community, i.e., not somewhere you'd think bad things would ever happen. This was one of my first major incidents. I usually do my shift on Friday nights after work, as statistically, it's the busiest time for us. It was sometime in early March 2009, and I was paired with a regular officer, and we were out in the response car driving around for the first few hours of the evening, until we were scheduled to go to an operation later. Around 11 PM, a burglary in progress report came over the radio, and we said that we would take it, as it was only a few miles from us. Blue lights and sirens were on, and we sped to the incident as fast as we could. It was dark, and the visibility was pretty crap, but we could still see enough to be driving safely. We decided to use a well-known shortcut to get to the other side of the village, avoiding a very annoying bridge/bollard combo that would save a few minutes from our time. The road was next to a farm, and it wasn't very well maintained. At the best of times, you could only really do 20 miles per hour down it, without causing significant damage to your wheels and underside of your car. But it would still be quicker than the normal road. As we carried on down the track, it quickly became apparent that something wasn't right. There were fresh, muddy tire tracks all over the road, and long scrapes in the tarmac, as if something metal was being pulled along the floor. At the time, I didn't know why, but it soon became clear when we rounded the corner and saw what looked like the mangled remains of some kind of biomechanical cyborg. Blood, guts, glass, hair and metal were all over the road, in the hedges, in the trees, and it was absolutely horrific. I had never seen death in such a grotesque form. My partner slammed on the brakes, and we spent a few seconds just absorbing what the hell we were looking at, before switching to rescue mode. We raced out the car, leaving the headlights to illuminate the scene, and steam was rising from the wreckage, a mixture of a radiator coolant and body heat. There was so much blood it was unreal. Too unreal. Our first priority was to look for survivors. The driver and passenger were obviously dead. I couldn't see into the back of the car, as it was just a complete mess. Over the sound of the engine running, I could hear what sounded like a baby making a very quiet moaning sound. Because our main source of light was from our car headlights, we couldn't see the front of the wreck very well at all. After hearing the noise, I ran back to get the maglite from the boot of the car, so that we could search the area. Some crash victims had been ejected up to 200 feet from the car. As we came around the front of the car, we realized the horror that actually happened. Why was there so much blood? And where was the baby? There was a cow wedged between a car and the ground, completely disemboweled. Intestines all over the grass, head snapped backwards, and milk was flowing out, and feces all over the place. And in the middle of its mother's mangled corpse was a calf, almost ready to be born. It was still trapped inside, and it was very badly injured, but it was alive and mooing to us. Backup arrived, not long after, but there was not much that could be done. Soko turned up and cordoned off the road, and we never found out exactly what happened, but we just carried on our shift after that. Unfortunately, the calf was euthanized by a vet who lived just a few towns over with some kind of injection. With jobs involving livestock, it usually falls to the farmer/owner to sort out the animals. It's their property after all. However, in this situation, because of the importance of keeping the scene preserved, it was necessary to put the calf down ASAP. 1, obviously to put an end to its suffering, and 2, to stop it escaping and causing damage to the scene. I only read the report afterwards, but apparently the vehicle was travelling well in excess of the speed limit. The road was the national speed limit, which in the UK on a single carriage road is 60 miles per hour. And due to the road condition and weather, it would have had no time to stop. The cow had apparently escaped the field and decided to lie down in the road, presumably to sleep, and had actually been seen during the event by other passing motorists. But as they were going at a sane speed, they managed to drive around it. The car must have been going close to 70 to inflict that kind of damage. Pretty much the same as hitting a stone wall. The driver, passenger and cow all died instantly. The calf was obviously protected by its mother's body. But what a shitty way to enter and exit the world. 6 years on the force. We responded to a traffic crash in which 4 people were in a sedan. All were intoxicated. The vehicle swerved off the road, hitting a culvert and left the occupants injured to the point that they could not exit the vehicle. The driver exited and walked to the roadway to get help. The car caught fire, and the passengers still inside were too drunk to know what was happening and couldn't get out in time. By the time we arrived on scene, no one was able to get within 40 yards of the car because of the heat. We were unable to get to the car despite trying several times. I've seen fatalities before, and they are all sad. But you learn to deal with it and move on. But those people were screaming for help, and no one could even get close to the car. By the time the fire department showed up, the coroner was pulling up as well. It's the worst feeling to see someone go like that, and not even be able to assist. Secondly, we responded to a traffic crash with a pedestrian on the highway. When we arrived, it was clear that the woman had committed suicide by kneeling down in the road and taking the full brunt of the next car that came down the road. Her husband arrived on scene a few moments after we did. He explained that she had been drinking and they got into a fight. She left the hotel room that they were staying in and walked to the highway a couple of yards away from the hotel. I don't know what his last words were to her, but they were not nice. I will never leave a dispute unsolved with my significant other now, and I always make sure to leave her with kind words. I work on the other side of the radio. I could have done without the major vehicle accident with fire that we went to a few years back. Driver was on the ground in flames, trying to crawl back into the burning vehicle, screaming for help. His baby girl was deceased in the back seat, still strapped into her car seat. The fire was burning so hot that the baby was nothing but bones by the time the fire was extinguished. The driver was flown to the hospital with third-degree burns all over a large part of his body, and ended up living. Honestly though, it would have been kinder if he'd have died along the way. Living with what he had must have been unimaginable pain. I could have done without hearing a man shoot himself while still on the phone to me. I could have also done without walking a hysterical father through CPR on his 18-month-old son, who he claimed he found drowned in the tub. In fact, he had beaten the kid to death. I could have done without the suicidal call, where a 16-year-old female hung herself from a trellis arch with an extension cord. Her little hands were still clutching the sides of the arch, and the dusty table behind her was covered in scuffs, as well as streaked with footprints for where she tried to pull herself back up after jumping and almost made it. It's emotionally draining. Most first responders either get numb or cynical, or get deeply warped senses of humour. I fall into the third category. It's incredibly difficult to make a career as a first responder if you don't learn to laugh. You have to learn how to take the call and move on. I've been doing this for 5 years, and sometimes it feels like forever. This is from the police officer which is in my family. It was a normal stop on the highway. The car was an old beat-up red Toyota. I switch the lights, and the car slowly makes its way to the shoulder and stops. I radio dispatch for info, and the plates come back expired. So I walk up to the car, and the driver is sweating like crazy, so I know something is up. There are 5 Hispanic middle-aged males in the car. So I pull the driver out and tell the rest to sit tight. Me and the driver walk over to the hood of my patrol car. I tell him his plates are out and whatnot, and he starts really shaking. I ask him what's up, and he tells me the guys in the back are loading a shotgun and are going to shoot me when I go to pull them out of the car. Almost losing my shit, I walk back to my car and casually as possible radio for backup. Backup comes, and we sit the driver in my patrol car, and we order the men in the back seat to get up with their hands up. They slowly agree. They're placed under arrest, and the car is searched. Sure enough, loaded sawn-offs under the back seat. I let the driver go and the other guys go to jail, and I get to go home and see my kids for another night. I am no longer a police officer. This is one of the calls I wish I had never gotten. Among all of the sudden infant deaths, dead bodies, subject with a gun, stabbings, shootings, suicides, and all the other stuff, this was a particularly shitty call, because it ended my career. I responded to a call on the 4th of July on an uncontrollable person attacking a family member. I was the first officer to arrive on scene, and it was pretty chaotic. Drunk people yelling at me that this person did this person did that. And I saw a young man in his 20s arguing with a woman. I was able to gather that it was a mother and son. In the argument, the son punches his mum square in the face. I order him to the ground and he doesn't comply. I assist him to the ground, and the fight is on. He's punching me, I'm punching him. I'm calling for Code 3 cover, emergency assistance, and the cavalry is on its way. During the struggle, I am trying to keep my bearing on where I am, in relation to everyone else. Then I get kicked. The family member who had just called me because of this kid is now attacking me. People all around me are trying to hurt me. I try and get my taser, but people start grabbing for my duty weapon. I draw my duty weapon and put it under my uniform between my vest and body, and I feel someone punch me really hard in the lower back, and it hurts like no other. Backup arrives, and we take the guy into custody, as well as a few others. The kid had a broken cheekbone, broken clavicle, and a dislocated shoulder. He is taken to the hospital, and the mum comes up and says she's sorry, and thanks me, as he was uncontrollable that night and had been using meth. My buddy asks if I'm okay, and I say yeah, it was just a fight. But it turned out that during the fight I had been stabbed. I thought it was a stiletto kick, but I'll never know for sure. It wasn't too bad though. 3 stitches and I was fine. Didn't go too deep and looked worse than it actually was. Later that night, I go back to the police department to change and go home. And I get called by my chief's office to debrief him on the situation. About 2 weeks later, halfway through one of my shifts, I get told that the chief and deputy chief need to speak with me. Now. I get asked for my badge and gun, and was fired, because I was a threat to officer safety. I later find out that the family was related to the chief in some roundabout way, and were threatening to sue the city. I was married to a cop. Hearing his stories and living his nightmares was a constant. The guy who was riding a motorcycle and got hit by a car, which cut him in half, with his intestines and organs spread between the 2 halves of his body. The man who disappeared and was found a week later, stuck in a culvert. His flesh was coming off his body. He was bloated, and the smell was horrific. That was his first death call. The young man who was base jumping from the bridge 486 feet above the water. and his chute didn't open. So he did a freefall. The video his friends took show how he curled into the fetal position just before hitting the water. It blew his shoes off when he hit, and his internal organs were mush. The same bridge that following Thanksgiving, a couple drove almost 200 miles while arguing. They got to the bridge and out of the car, still fighting. The man jumped to his death, and the woman quickly followed. After the recovery of the bodies, the coroner found that the woman was actually a man with his parts duct taped between his cheeks. And then, my worst nightmare, getting the call that they were taking my husband to hospital after he was hit outside his patrol car while on call. He never made it back out of that hospital. My dad is a police officer and told me this story once. He responds to a call about a woman standing at the edge of a bridge, looking like she's gonna jump. Another car radios that they're closer to the bridge, so my dad heads to the underside just in case she jumps. As my dad is getting out of his car, an officer radios that she's tossed a bag or something, and she's gone. My dad gets down there to see where she landed, and she died from the impact. The bag was actually her 3-year-old son. Apparently, she was going to lose custody, and that was how she decided to handle it. He told me it's the closest thing he's ever come to losing it at work, that even though she had died, he wanted to just kick her head in. It probably didn't help that he had 4 young kids at home when this happened. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I told you these stories were dark. Really, some absolutely horrifying stories. I actually found them hard to read. So, to whoever had the question, do you ever find stories hard to read, during my live stream the other week, the answer is yes. I found some of these very challenging and very sad. But anyway, I hope that you enjoyed it nonetheless. If of course you did, I would really appreciate it if you could drop a like and leave a comment, as it goes a long way in helping me beat that YouTube algorithm, who is of course my very best friend in the world. Also, I would like to give a huge thanks again to my amazing patrons. It seriously means a lot, and your help goes a long way. I hope you're listening, because I'm really, really grateful. If you're interested in becoming a patron too, all that you need to do is go to patreon.com, which I've left a link to in the description, in order to check it out. Thanks for your consideration, guys. It's really very much appreciated. If there's a story that you would like me to read in an upcoming video, all that you need to do is submit it to my Reddit, or alternatively, send it to my email. Just be sure to include as much description, paragraphing and punctuation as possible, as that will maximize the chances of your story being read in future. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.